Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Iblis Manifestations podcast. This channel features lengthy off-limits conversations with various different artists and entrepreneurs, predominantly from the underground metal scene. We take deep dives into the topics of life, music, spirituality, and take insight from a variety of thought-provoking perspectives from personalities who you don't often hear from in a mainstream settings. I am your host, Cheyenne, and I was originally born and raised in Iran and currently reside in the UK. I am the frontman and founding member of the black death metal band TRIVAX, who have been active since 2009. The band originally started in the Islamic Republic of Iran, where such type of music is banned as well as a punishable offense. You can check the band's pages for any updates on tour dates as well as new music. I am also a personal trainer and an online fitness coach who specializes in people achieving the best versions of themselves physically and mentally. Having been someone who was once extremely out of shape and overweight, I find it to be my duty to be able to pass on the information and knowledge which I've gained to help others achieve the same transformation. The Iblis Manifestations podcast also features a variety of solo episodes where I discuss personal experiences and anecdotes in a very candid fashion, covering everything from mental health, spirituality, philosophy, and even paranormal experiences. This is the Iblis Manifestations podcast. To support it, be sure to subscribe to the channel and visit the link in the descriptions.
It's great talking to you, Cheyenne, really. And best of luck to your endeavors for this podcast. I think it's a great initiative.
You're my favorite person to talk to for interviews and stuff. So I love what you're espousing out here. I love the knowledge and the perspectives that you're curating through this, and I'm just so honored to be a part of it. Thank you.
As I told you, it was one of the most interesting interviews I've ever had, because we talk a lot more things than just music, and I really appreciated that.
I respect you deeply, and it's an honor to be here.
And friends, remember as always, better to die on your feet than to live on your knees. Enjoy the podcast. There we go. All right then. Good evening, Mr. Aaron Stainthorpe. It is an absolute pleasure to be sitting with you tonight on Iblis Manifestations. How are you doing, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's good to be here. Tell you what would be even better if we somehow were face to face. You know, perhaps it wouldn't be funny if you lived about 3 miles away and we could have easily just been in the same room, but I suspect that's not the case. But otherwise, it's good to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, man. My pleasure. I'm actually in Cardiff, so we're still a few hours apart, I would say. Yeah. Maybe 4 or 5 hours drive, thereabouts?
I guess so, yeah.
That's it, yeah. Well, we did obviously meet up at Scarborough at Fortress Festival. You know, it was really good to speak to you, man. And you had some really great stuff to share, you know. And I already said to you whilst we were there, man, you know, I've been listening to your voice has resided within my ears throughout a very long time, you know, through different phases and periods, you know. So yeah, I thought let's get talking. But first and foremost, obviously, I'm very excited for you because you got so much stuff happening with High Parasite at the moment. And where was it that you guys just played this weekend gone?
We were at the north of Holland at Into the Grave Festival, it was a blast. The week before we were in Iceland at Sautan Festival. Yes. And this weekend I'm heading to Lithuania for a festival whose name I can't pronounce, so I'm not even going to bother doing it. But that would be good. I think it's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We're playing on Sunday. And then we come back for a few days. Then we're doing a very small tour with Unto Others.
That's right, yeah.
And then we go back to 2 festivals, Germany and Slovenia, I think. And then another 2 festivals back to back. Oh, gosh. And then tour with Paradise Lost. And then more festivals. So, yeah, it's quite a busy time right now.
Living the dream, eh?
Well, it's funny. It's kind of like that as well, but also in between the High Parasite gigs, I've got some poetry gigs as well, which is good. And then I'm helping a band out called Legea Wept, and we have 4 shows with those guys. There's about 12 in the band, violins, opera singers. I'm doing some narration and a little bit of talking. So yeah, by the end of this year, mate, I will have done about 50 gigs, which is the most I've ever done in my life.
Wow, look at that. That's awesome, man. Very, very pleased for you. And I know that you actually did some sort of the poetry gigs with my friend Mark Deeks from Arth as well. Yeah. And yeah, he's a great guy also. Shout out to him. And yeah, man, it must be very refreshing for yourself, I would imagine. I mean, perhaps I'm being presumptuous here, but it must be refreshing after so many years of performing music, or at least being known for performing music live a certain way, to now kind of perhaps come out of your shell a bit more. I don't know if that's the right phrasing for it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I didn't know I needed to change. I don't think anybody does in their life until change comes knocking. You do what you do because, well, you love it. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. Then we hit a bit of a brick wall. But that, what's the saying? When one door closes, another one opens. So while my dying bride had this argument, rather than dwell on it and sit there festering. I was lucky enough to have High Parasite rolling alongside as well, so I just leapt on that one, and that's been keeping me really busy. And then, as I said, the poetry thing, which I've never done before, I've done it twice, and that was thanks to the people at Dark Earth Records in Liverpool. They encouraged me to go over and just do some poetry reading one night, and I was like, but I've never done that before. But again, friends were saying, well, if you don't do it, you'll kick yourself for not doing it, so go and do it. Yeah. So I went and did it, and it's great. So now, I'm doing all kinds of things. I'm super busy at the moment, but I'm loving it. I love being this busy. It's great.
Of course, because that's the thing ultimately as an artist, is that you just want to have the opportunity to get to just channel and express yourself, perhaps similar to how you even do. One thing I wanted to talk to you about a bit more as well, actually, before maybe we kind of get a bit more into the My Dying Bride stuff. One thing of yours that I've kind of been looking into a bit more, that I was fascinated by, is some of your photography, as well as the artwork and some of the designs that you've been doing. I didn't realize how many years you've actually been doing that for, and some of the old album covers, I only just discovered recently that you actually made those.
Yeah, I think the first cover I did, so Dave McKean did the first EP and the first album when we were on Peaceville Records, and Peaceville had a really good relationship with him, and then he started doing a lot of other bands on Peaceville, and then of course his fee went up and up and up. We simply couldn't afford him. So I said, well, I'll have a go. I like doing, I've been using Photoshop since version 2, not CS2, but version 2, right, which goes back, 30 years or something like that, or whatever it was. And so I said, well, I'll have a go. So I took some photos and I arranged the photos in a certain fashion. Then I would photograph the arrangement, and then I would take the negatives, and I would drip acid onto the negatives somehow, and then I would photograph the negatives. And it was an interesting process. In fact, this was before Photoshop, because Photoshop hasn't actually been out that long. So back then it was practical photography, actual thing cool, right in front of me being photographed. And that was in the days when, as well, when you took some photographs, you would take your little 35mm film container, you take it to a chemist, and you have to wait 7 days for the photographs to come back. Those days seem such a long time ago now, but that's the way it is. So I think I did our second EP was probably the first. The Thrash of Naked Limbs, I think, was the first public artwork I did, and then I did Turn Loose the Swans. And still to this day, some people still don't realize that the CD, cassette and vinyl all had 3 different covers. So people assume the swan is on them all, but it's not. The cassette is a completely different piece of artwork. Right. The CD is completely different. The vinyl's different. It's just, I thought it was an interesting idea, and Peaceville ran with it, thankfully. And then I've been doing on and off album covers ever since. I've loved it.
That's really cool. Yeah. That's actually quite interesting hearing how you were doing that, because it's essentially kind of like you say you were using like actual acid. I don't know if that's LSD or like actual acid or both maybe.
Well, it's like it's a high density vinegar. I can't remember what the name is.
Right.
But it's sort of, particularly if you put it on a glossy photograph, it creates weird colors and somehow melts the image, but not the paper. It's very weird. So I used that on a few things, but I just like practical things. I used to work in a factory, and the factory was really old school. And in the sort of the attic space, they'd dump equipment they no longer needed, and I would sneak up there with my camera and photograph, dead spiders, cobwebs, rusty pieces of metal, anything that I thought was interesting, and I would try and incorporate them into my artwork in some fashion. And for the most part, it worked. I haven't, since digital came along, though. I really do enjoy digital, but you still have to have a piece of artwork to begin with, which it generally involves me going out with the camera, taking photographs of interesting things, then importing them into Photoshop and then manipulating them digitally. I enjoy that as much as I do with the practical side of things.
That's very interesting, because it's almost like, to me, it, like I guess the same way how you have Pro Tools and Cubase and all of that now, it's the same as back in the day when you actually had to use like a steel plate for reverb back in the day, and then you have to project the sound into that. Very cool. When you mentioned spiders, that reminds me of the album cover for that album of yours, 34.7. Yeah.
That's one of those spiders.
And
a lot of if you look at the fine lines, there's quite a lot of fine digital lines dotted around the album. They all came from, I used to have a big stack stereo system, a Pioneer system, and it had loads of lines and weird technical stuff I didn't really know. So I just used that as an inspiration, and I took some of those lines and I thought, well, I can put lines in digital things all over this picture of a dead spider, which someone thought it was a giant monster on a planet.
Oh, wow, okay. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, which is interesting. I like it when people, it's same with the lyrics. People have their own interpretation sometimes. Sometimes it's very obvious what the lyric's about, sometimes not. And I quite like the feedback you get from people when they come up with an idea and you think, that's better than my idea. It's nice that people can see something in the work you do that you didn't realize was there.
It's funny that you say that, especially since that particular album came up, because I remember being, I think, around 14 years old when I discovered you guys back in Iran, and I discovered you through my guitar teacher. And I remember being given a bunch of bootleg copies of your records, obviously, because it's Iran. You can't just fucking, it's not like Peaceful's going to deliver it to your door.
Right.
So I remember listening to that album in particular, and it was actually one of my earliest, if not the first impression of you guys. And I remember listening to it, but because you have to understand, this is a time where there's no sort of preconceived notions of music. There's no, oh, this album is cool, this album's not cool, oh, you should listen to the earlier stuff. There was no one else around me, so it was just me and the music, Right. And because of that, obviously I understand that album, you were very experimental at the time compared to everything else that you did, and it has that reputation. But for me, it was great because I got to listen to it and actually hear just the album itself. And none of the extra nonsense around it. And I fucking loved it. I actually loved that record, like even that first song. I know it's like, when I listen to it now, like I hear that, okay, yeah, this is different, and there's like weird bits or like some parts are quite drawn out. But even from that first song, I remember being fascinated. I'm like, what is he saying? It's like some Chinese sounding lady talking on the TV or something like that. And then
that was the local Chinese takeaway.
It was.
Yeah. We went in there with a microphone and said, can you read these lines out? And it was supposed to be like an interview. Do you remember the interview in Blade Runner? When the guy's trying to figure out if he's a replicant or not.
Right, yes.
So we got this Chinese woman to read out questions. So she's actually asking me similar questions about humanity, but in Chinese, and I'm answering in English.
That's fantastic. And I like how it just ends with a fuck you. That's the best part.
That's when that's almost like the trigger moment in Star Wars when Harrison Ford with the gun under the table, which of course they've edited out now. That's the moment where she's discovered who I am. So
right,
boom
right.
time. But yeah,
got it.
Back then, we worked hard as a band. We didn't cut corners. When we, you come up with an idea like that, you either think, oh, it's too difficult to work out, or, and you don't do it, or you do what we do, and you get a microphone and a tape recorder, and you go into the local Chinese and you ask them nicely while ordering some food, and they're helpful, and we use that on an album. We were very creative with a lot of the things we did, because we wanted to be noticed, but we didn't want to be the same as everyone else. We wanted to be slightly different. We wanted to have an edge that other bands didn't have, be it the artwork or the lyrics, or the fact that we were brave enough to mix doom and death, because back then you had your doom fans and your death metal fans, and we could have alienated ourselves completely. The doom fans could have thought it's too much death metal, and the death metal fans could have thought there's too much doom, and we could have sold 0 records. But we somehow seemed to get the ingredients just right. And, we played doom festivals, death metal festivals. We played the goth festivals. We played Inferno. We get invited to a lot of different places because we're quite a broadly appealing band, which is rather nice.
Of course. I think that's totally appropriate. I think people who might maybe look at the band now or have followed the band for a while, you have to understand that on paper, that formula would not have worked back then.
Yeah.
And, and it is very brave, as you said, especially, taking a little bit of the kind of Celtic frost sound, but then mixing it with some of the other, maybe like the violins and stuff like that, I get it. I kind of in my head, I always kind of put early Celtic frost and My Dying Bride kind of in a similar sort of trajectory, especially with Into the Pandemonium, and kind of when they started going avant-garde, everyone kept calling it,
Exactly, yeah. Well, we were big fans of them, even the early, Hellhammer days.
Yeah.
And it was just, I liked bands who were very popular. Master of Puppets had only been out fairly recently, and it was like the greatest thrash album I'd ever heard. The production was massive, the songs were massive, everything was brilliant.
Yeah,
and
still is.
But then I can easily put on Apocalyptic Raids, Hellhammer, and love it as much. They didn't have half the budget, of course, that Metallica had, but it didn't matter. Yeah. If you're creative, you're creative, and I just like that. And it's since those early Hellhammer days, I followed Celtic Frost for years and years and years, and Celtic Frost and Candlemas were like my babies, and some of the other guys in My Dying Bride were more your sort of Slayer, Darkthrone. So that's why we had doom and death metal elements, because we all wanted to put some of our own, our influences in there. So we were a doom death band.
I'd like to quickly interrupt this episode for the following message. My band TRIVAX will be releasing our 3rd full-length album, The Great Satan, via the legendary Osmos Productions on the 30th of May, 2025. If you're into extreme metal that's unapologetically defiant, politically and religiously charged, and unafraid to make bold statements where other ways shy away, then you need to hear this album. I would say that musically, The Great Satan blends dark ritualistic Middle Eastern elements with traditional folk and very dynamic usage of the extreme metal subgenres, creating a unique and immersive soundscape. The intro track actually utilizes folk instruments, including baklama and oud, and throughout the album, you will also get the usage of 3 different languages. One, which is, of course, my native language of Farsi, or otherwise known as Persian. We also have songs that are sung in Arabic and, of course, English. The album embodies rebellion, violence, and ecstasy, unafraid to say what so many extreme metal bands will not. Copies will be available directly from the TRIVAX Bandcamp page, or otherwise from the official Osmos web store. Thank you for your support, and please enjoy the rest of the episode. I think that's exactly the thing that made the band unique, and I think that collaborative effect, I think that the music of My Dying Bride, it's one of those things. I think that, now we can get into that if you like, but I think it's one of those things. It could have never been maybe a solo project, if you will. I think a solo project would have never ended up sounding the way that you guys did. I think you may perhaps needed the different sort of elements and creative inputs. One thing I always say is like every person has their own fingerprint, okay, which is, by the way, a fucking crazy thing to even think about on its own. So when you put 2 or 3 people in together, then that's an even more unique situation, and I think that especially in the context of creativity, I think that's a very important factor. What was it to you personally that made you perhaps quite drawn towards the more darker, more kind of moodier elements within music, as well as photography and artwork, because that's something that I can see all over your work, everything you've ever done. There's always sort of moodiness and darkness, even though you're quite a fun guy to actually be around, and you've got a great sense of humor. What was it about that kind of stuff that always kind of attracted you?
Well, I've never been afraid to be an emotional person. Men are supposed to not cry and all that BS. And I realised quite early on, I was terrible at maths at school, but I loved English literature, and I learnt about all the great poets, and I used to love reading. And particularly, you'd have those lessons sometimes when the teacher, right, we're all going to read the same book. Who wants to read the first bit? And I'm straight away like, I'll read this. And no one else wants to read out loud in class because it can be terrifying. Yeah. I absolutely loved it. And, you would only need to read like a paragraph or 2. And I'd immediately move on to the 3rd paragraph before the teacher could step in and say, right, Aaron, can we let someone else? Because I loved it, and I loved the emotion. I loved the language of poetry. And, so that, along with being a big fan of Depeche Mode, whose music obviously is a bit dark, but I just loved it. So I liked poetry, and I liked, I was in the Depeche Mode fan club for a while. It was great.
You were?
I was, yes.
Amazing. There you go.
Yeah. And then I just kind of liked that interesting emotional side of things. And so when My Dying Bride formed, I thought, I'm not going to write the same lyrics as everybody else, because I don't want to. I don't want to write about, drinking virgin's blood and all the rest of that nonsense. I want to be able to write something that's a bit more sensitive, that's a bit more emotive, that will perhaps draw more people in, or it could, of course, push people away. They might just think, what's this nonsense? Give me swords and sorcery again. I don't like My Dying Bride because I don't know what they're doing. And it really worked. There was a great deal of appeal with what we were doing. And what was interesting as well, and this wasn't the master plan, but so many more women showed up at our gigs, because you'll be aware, not so much these days, but in the past, men must be 99% of the scene. Yeah. Certainly in the 90s. And then when we started doing what we did, I think the romanticism within the lyrics, the violin added a great sensitivity to the music as well. And that appealed to the more feminine of the human race. And so when we performed live, it was like 50-50 men and women in the audience, which was unheard of. We'd been to metal gigs and it's all men, it's a sausage fest. And yep. It changed when we did what we did. And I think it's just because we were just a bit more sensitive.
I think that there's definitely some value to that as well. By the way, that I didn't realize, but it of course makes perfect sense that you're a big Depeche Mode fan. I am as well. I am a complete fanboy over that band. Old stuff and new stuff. I'm maybe in a slightly more rare category with that. I don't know where you stand on that, but they are fucking amazing. So that's, I think what you're saying there is quite important, because I can imagine, especially metal at the time, it must have been so taboo to go to places that you went to. It was almost like you were it's almost like the poetic punk rock of the scene at the time. You know, you were the one basically saying, fuck you all, I'm going to do what I want to do. And then obviously as a result, then, you know, it resonated with people in a different way. And
the way we performed live as well, you know, we didn't just rock up in our jeans and t-shirt and shout, are you ready to rock? And I think we didn't do that because I was terrified of playing live, because the lyrics were emotional, and I was terrified of crying on stage, which I did all the time anyway. And I found it hard to talk with an audience. You know, I barely say anything. And I certainly don't do the whole rock and roll, you know, all the girls say, yeah, all the boys say, yo. There was, you know, we just didn't do that. Other bands were doing that, and we just weren't interested. And so when we played live, it was a whole different thing. You know, the music was different. The way we acted was different, which meant the audience acted differently. There was very little stage diving. We always kept a crazy song for the end, because we realized this is heavy metal at the end of the day. There's some pent up, you know, frustration, and some people there clearly want to let go. So we'd always keep a rapid song for the very end, and we'd say, right, this is the last song. If you want to go mental, now's your chance. And off you went. And then the stage diving erupted like nothing you've ever seen. It was crazy. But yeah, for the most part, people just enjoyed, and went, at the end of each song, they clapped and cheered, and, you know, it was great.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the Forever People probably being like the
something
the
like that. Yeah,
example. Yeah, absolutely, man. I think it's very very cool to hear that, and I think that's interesting to me, hearing your perspective on saying that. You were terrified of crying on stage, but then you did it anyway. You know what, Aaron? I love hearing stuff like that, just because it shows me and to the audience, you know, as someone who's been a listener of My Dying Bride for, well, practically more than half of my life at this point, actually. I just love that kind of authenticity, and that, you know, like, you really meaning actually what you're gonna do, meaning what you're going on stage for. You know, it's something that I'm actually kind of militant about it on here. You know, I always say on this podcast, I'm like, you know, like, as an artist, you know, like, I can't imagine what it would feel like to go on stage and play riffs and sing lyrics to people that you don't mean 100%. Like, what a waste of everyone else and my own time if that was the case. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what I mean. Yeah, I've never been a born performer. It doesn't come naturally to me. You know, I have to force myself on stage, and I have to force myself to try and enjoy it, which is difficult. I am enjoying it a hell of a lot more now with High Parasite, because although I still invest in the lyrics, the music doesn't warrant those heart-rendering lyrics that I used to write for My Dying Bride. My Dying Bride's music is perfect for that. High Parasite isn't, so I write a different style for High Parasite. And I actually look forward to going on stage with High Parasite, because that emotion isn't there anymore. So I know I'm not going to cry on stage. So I try and enjoy it a bit more. And, you know, after you know, being on stage for 34 years with MDB, I'm finally enjoying it. Do you know what I mean? My Dying Bride gigs were unbelievable at the end. They were just, I got so nervous at the build-up and so nervous on stage that when I came off stage, I felt a huge burden had been released mentally, and it was like I'd survived something very unenjoyable. And it was the best part of the gigs was when I said good night. And it shouldn't be like that, but that's how it was with me. I couldn't operate any other way. That's how my brain worked, and it doesn't work that way with High Parasite, because the music and the lyrics aren't that way. This is a new lease of life. I think I told you in Scarborough, I feel 10 years younger now, because those emotions, the deep, heavy emotions, they will play on you and your life, and they will weigh down your mind more than you think they will. And so when they're given a rest and you take on something else, I feel absolutely brilliant. I feel like I could run around the block. I can't, but I feel like I could, because I've just had this injection of life that I didn't really know I needed.
That's really interesting, because this is exactly was going to be the question that I was going to ask you, and it was, because when you mean your art the same way that you do, as we just said, that also comes at a price. Like there's a receipt at the end of it every time. And there's the good, and then there's the bad. Sometimes it's a channel for getting rid of the darkness that's in you, but then sometimes that darkness lingers, and it becomes this situation where it actually becomes who you are. So how do you feel like playing this music with My Dying Bride in particular for all of those years actually affected you as a person and as a human being?
Well, playing live is always, it's invigorating to some degree, no matter how much hard work it is, because when I look at the set list, gaffer tape to the stage, and I see there's some songs aren't quite so heavy on the emotions, and I think, okay, these are going to be good. We'll get through these. The crowd will love it, and then you see some tormenting numbers coming, and you think, geez, here we go, and then you just sort of, you're like a ship in a storm. Just plow on through it. Just plow on through it. It's not very nice, but just get on with it. And that's the reason why we'd only do 10 or 15 shows a year, because they plagued me so much. And also it meant that the shows we did play were special. If you play 150 shows a year, you won't give a shit about where you are, or the audience, or even your own music. You just want to get back to the hotel. Let's get this over with as quickly as possible and go and sleep in the hotel. We never wanted anything like that. We wanted to make sure that the 15 gigs we did a year, we picked them. We picked which festivals we did, which is, incredibly lucky. And we'd go a day early, enjoy the culture of wherever it might be, do the gig, and take our time getting home the next day, and again enjoy some great food and meet some new people, and we'd make an event of it, and enjoy our time in someone else's culture, absorb something like that, and it made all the gigs special and very memorable. And I just, I could never be in a band that does 150 shows a year, because you're in and out of the country so fast, everything's a blur, and you just want it to end. And that's not, I mean, that's a lot of bands tour a lot. And as I say, I'm doing more gigs this year than I've ever done. But there's a limit. I couldn't do 150 shows a year. It would kill me.
Yeah, you start to recognize the bathroom of the public restroom at Stansted more so than your own living room, and you don't want that.
I don't want that stuff. No, this will be a busy year, and I just don't want to. I mean, I love being on a tour bus. Those days are behind me at the moment. My Dying Bride were a tour bus band, and being in High Parasite, we've got to start at the bottom like everybody else. So we're in a van. We did the gig last week at Into the Grave, and it took us 15 hours to drive there and 15 hours to drive home. And it's not great. If you had a tour bus, it would be great. But those, we've got to work hard. No one's going to hand a tour bus to us on a plate. We've got to work hard, get the numbers up, and eventually we'll get to the bit where we're on a bus again. And that does help touring. But I don't, even with High Parasite, I don't want to be doing hundreds and hundreds of gigs, one after the other, because, well, I'm not a young man anymore. And you think, oh, we've got a gig in Vienna. How beautiful would it be to do a gig in Vienna? But you'll be in and out in the blink of an eye, and you'll be like, well, I didn't get the chance to absorb the city, the people, the lifestyle, the food. So why bother? If I go somewhere, we did Iceland a couple of weeks ago. Again, we went a day early. and we enjoyed the whole experience. It was absolutely fantastic. The same with Holland last week. It was amazing. We wandered around the city. We ate the food. We met the people. It's brilliant. You can't do that when you're doing an enormous tour.
Yeah, this is totally true, by the way. I 100% relate to what you're saying there. And, sorry, this is just my cat grown out of my shoulder here. The thing with it is we do the same, actually, if we can help it. Like we did the same in Barcelona, went there a day early, left a day later, same with Italy, and we've got a few more like that coming up. But yeah, I know with the big tours, you just don't really get to see much, and it's like, it can be quite a lonely process almost being a musician, because it's kind of like, what have you got to show for it, and usually it's not necessarily a financial thing, so, and then you don't necessarily have a physical thing to show someone because these are incredible moments that you shared with people in the audience and on stage and on the road. Those kind of things, you can't really like hold it up and show it to someone, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I have to just cut straight to the chase with you, if that's okay, man. So one thing that's obviously happened right now, and again, I'm a massive My Dying Bride fan, as I've already said. Doesn't matter if I'm into black metal, death metal, or pop, or jazz, or synthwave, whatever. I will always have a room in my heart for My Dying Bride. Like period, always the case. And having said that, I have an extremely difficult time imagining the band without your voice and your presence. I mean, it's, to me, and this is, I'm giving my personal opinion here. Please feel free to put me in my place and give your thoughts on it.
Yeah.
But to me, it's kind of like having My Dying Bride without Aaron. It's like having Danzig without Glenn Danzig. It's just kind of like, at least from a music and live performance perspective, I just have a very hard time imagining it. So would you mind just maybe telling us, like, what's the latest update? Because I saw that the band announced that they were doing some shows without you, which I was very surprised by, as were many other people. So what's your perspective? What can you share with us about the current ongoings of the band?
Well, in fact, the last thing I heard was they're writing new material as well now, which is interesting. I have not heard from Andrew for over a year. And as me and him are the only founder members left, we never had a manager. Me and Andrew managed as best we could for years and years and years. There was only one stint when we nearly got a manager, Ronnie James Dio's ex-wife, funnily enough. But that was a long, long time ago. So me and Andrew figured, well, we could probably do it. So we had a go at it, and then we had this big bust up. I can't even remember when it was now. A year ago, a year and a half. And I thought, we'll let it die down a bit, and when we come to our senses, we'll get around a table, thrash out our differences, and reignite the band. And then I saw they were gigging without me. So I thought, well, that obviously there's no communication then. So what do? I'll just keep doing what I do until there is some communication. And there still hasn't been. So I'm getting on with my life. I'm not going to sit there and stew and wait for things to happen. I'm going to crack on and maintain a busy schedule. But I've no idea who they're going to use, in the studio if they do a new album. I don't even know if there's a record deal anymore, because everything's gone pear-shaped at Nuclear Blast. In fact, I don't even know if Nuclear Blast is operating as a full record label anymore. I've heard all kinds of weird stories, and I know for a fact that the guy I used to chat with at Nuclear Blast, he's not there anymore. So there's been, over the last couple of years, there's been massive, massive changes. So I don't even know if My Dying Bride have a deal. And if they do, I don't know where that leaves me. I've not left the band and I haven't been kicked out. So I don't understand where we're going to go. I don't know what the future is. But, having been a founder member and in the band for 35 years, I'm not leaving. If they want to do things without me, well, good luck to them.
Wow. I have to admit, that's really sad to hear. But also, I'm not sure what it looks like when it comes to some of the perhaps legal logistics when you're talking about a big band like My Dying Bride. But are there any kind of, I mean, within the context of what you can discuss here, is there any kind of like legal obligations, you know, because there's all kinds of fucking conspiracy theories online about you guys at the moment, you know, about how, oh, you have to perform a certain number of shows and then that's the reason why they have to do that, which didn't make sense to me, but, you know, yeah, we can put that one to bed right away. And then there's other stuff, you know, about obviously, because as business people, obviously both yourself and Andrew would be essentially like directors at My Dying Bride. Is that a correct term to use there? So what's the so is the partnership still intact legally, or is that something that's dissolved, or is it all kind of up in the air? Like how does that work if that's the case? Because it sounds quite a complicated situation.
Yeah, it will, and it'll only get more complicated. I don't fully understand it. You would hope and imagine that as a founder member who hasn't left, I would have some authority somehow, but it seems not. So I don't really know. I mean, I'm probably going to have to seek legal advice at some point. You know, obviously I didn't want to, and I don't want to. But if a record comes out, a My Dying Bride record comes out, and I'm not on it, but I'm still officially the singer, I don't know legally where the hell what I'm supposed to do. So at some point, unfortunately, it looks like I might have to seek legal advice. Which, you know, in this country we have the Musicians Union, so it's not a problem. They've got all the experts, and I do know some people quite high up in the business. So I've got people with their finger on the pulse who I can chat with and just see what's what. But I don't want to. I would just rather keep singing My Dying Bride songs. But maybe I don't have a choice with that.
Well, hopefully it doesn't have to come to that, but obviously I can appreciate that you're showing a great deal of restraint there, should we say, you know, because maybe you could have gone down a different pathway. And I guess maybe even if it's the scheduling, if My Dying Bride's only doing a certain number of shows per year, then it's not even so much a case of it conflicting with High Parasite. Would that be accurate to say?
Yeah, there was never going to be a conflict. If MDB do about 15 gigs a year, and sometimes 3 or 4 years between albums, I could be in 10 bands and it wouldn't affect the scheduling of My Dying Bride. You know, and I spoke to Toombs, you know, back in the day, and I said, make sure, here's some My Dying Bride gigs, make sure there's no High Parasite clashing. I don't want any clashing of any gigs at all. And he said, absolutely fine, that will not happen. And it never even got that far, because we had a big bust up before then and the gigs got cancelled anyway. But I was always, you don't sacrifice the main band for your smaller band. You know, that doesn't happen. Can you imagine Lars Ulrich saying to Metallica, do you know what, guys, can we cancel those big gigs because me and my mates want to mess around in this other band? It doesn't work that way. It doesn't happen like that. And it would be ridiculous to even think that, because I know some people think, oh, Aaron's concentrating more on High Parasite than My Dying Bride, so he sacrificed My Dying Bride for High Parasite. You don't do things like that. It's utterly ridiculous. Why would I? My Dying Bride's been an absolute delight for me for 30 odd years. I'm not going to let that go. And I'm certainly not going to let a smaller band batter it out of the way. It doesn't work like that. You know, literally every musician I know is in more than one band. It's easy. Anyone can do it. It's not an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, well, there's multiple things right there that we've just put to bed, I think, for a lot of people, because there's so many different questions and theories. And yeah, well, I think that, I mean, are you in touch with any other members of the band since then, or?
I see Neil every once in a while for a beer in Halifax, but zero communication with the others. They've all got my details. They've all got my details, but
have you tried to reach out to them since this bust up that you mentioned like
there's no point. There's no point, because if they're not contacting me, they don't want to. So it's pointless me chasing them. They're doing what they want to do, and they clearly don't want to do it without me. So.
Well, that's quite unfortunate, man. And at the end of the day, like you guys made a very beautiful thing together, and I can sort of sympathize with the fact that it must be at least hard for yourself personally, since we're sat talking here. It must be hard to have built such a massive legacy with the band together. And then to look back, and then this is kind of like the well, hopefully it's not the final point, but at least it's the current point of where things stand.
Yeah, the reason why I'm not, screaming and shouting is because I genuinely think it's not over. If I knew it was definitely over, then yeah, I'd be heartbroken. But I try to remain optimistic that somehow we can work stuff out. I don't see why we can't. We're not kids. We're not in a gang. We can surely work something out. And because normally, when bands split up, there's normally some sort of financial irregularity. Someone's run off with all the money, or there's some infidelity. You slept with my wife, or you slept with my wife. There's bands split up because of serious. Something's gone really bad, really bad. Mm-hmm. We have none of that, which is why I think we can get back together. But let's see.
Okay. So I'm just going to put this out there, and obviously say whatever you will at your own discretion. But for example, if Andrew's listening to this right now, what would you say to him?
Give us a ring.
Give us a ring.
Give us a ring.
There you go. Simple as that.
It's not hard, is it? It's not hard, is it?
No, it's not, or at least it shouldn't be, especially, in the context of people working together. This is, it's one of those things, Aaron, I was talking to my fiance earlier this morning, and I was saying to her, I was like, there's all the stuff out there in the world about, there's all kinds of different guidance, whether it's about running a business, there's different like methods and pathways that you can go down. If it's about getting in shape, I'm a fitness coach myself, so I can tell you exactly, here's what you do, X, Y, and Z. You eat this much, you train this much, do this, and then you're going to get in really good shape. You're going to lose weight. You're going to gain weight, whatever it is you need to do. Easy, right? Human relations, it's the most complicated fucking thing on the face of the earth. Like, there's no way of like mathematically figuring stuff out. There's history involved. There's so many different things. There's egos, and then there's personality clashes and history, all kinds of stuff. It's difficult. I think to me, it's like the toughest thing to try and resolve ever.
It is, yeah, but that's the beauty of human beings. We're all different. We've all got an opinion, and rightly so. If we're all the same, it would be a dreadful place. But sometimes those opinions clash, and there's consequences, and sometimes you try and put things into perspective and just think, Jesus, get over it. Bands split up all the time. It's not the end of the world. It's just music. And then other times you think, yeah, but I've been in it 35 fucking years. I've invested a lot of time, effort, and in the early days, money. So of course, it's more than that to me. I spoke to a couple of people about it in someone I spoke to. He just laughed. Just said, "Oh, you're not the first and you won't be the last. Get over it." And I just thought, all right, well, that's easy for you to say. It's not your fucking band. Yeah. So, in the grand scheme of living, it's just a blip. But we'll see. I mean, as I said, it might not be over yet.
Well, I hope not. I like that sense of optimism that you were putting out there, and I hope as a fan, as a listener, that the rest of the band would perhaps reconsider that. But we will see. I think it's it's a difficult dynamic as well, because it's like everyone says being in a band is like marriage without sex, So it's like, if you get into an argument, you can't even just have like makeup sex, and then, feel better afterwards and say, nah, forget about it, Yeah,
and I think sometimes had we had a manager, then the manager would iron out a lot of the stuff, because obviously with me and Andrew doing it, there's a lot of boring stuff in the background the public they're never aware of, because they just see what the band put out, records and videos and stuff like that. And the manager, a manager can filter out all the crap, accountancy, solicitors, they deal with all that boring stuff to allow the band to remain creative.
Yeah.
And if there is a coming together, the manager will just bang your heads together and say, just fucking get on with it. But because me and Andy manage the band, it's so much more difficult. There's so many more things going on in the background that people just don't know about because they don't know how to manage bands, whereas we do. And so we understand all the underlying things that people just they're not aware of.
I see. Well, did you ever have any kind of disagreements over those things?
Oh, we disagree all the time.
Yeah.
We've always argued about stuff, normally album cover artwork and shit like that. We never really argued much about the actual music. When we went to rehearsal, it was great, but when you hear that music loud, it's fucking unbelievable. It's just it's fantastic. But just again, when you're both managing the band, there's going to be arguments sometimes about, should we fly to this gig or should we get on a bus? Should we use this artist for the cover, or should we use whose photographs we're going to use? Blah blah blah. And we argue all the time, but that's just because we both want the very, very best for My Dying Bride, which is exactly the way it should be. And again, difference of opinion, and it's caused another clash, the biggest one we've had. But I think we can get over it. You always, in the heat of an argument, I know I said some bullshit and I heard some bullshit come my way. But in the heat of the moment, you literally say anything in a fight and you regret it later on. I've not had the chance to say, do you know what? I didn't mean that. Or I meant it at the time, but now I've had more time to think about it. I might go back on what I said. But we've not. This is the kind of conversation I'd like, but it doesn't appear to be a thing that's going to happen.
Right, I see. Well, I think it's just the simple fact that you're putting it out there is a big move. And by the way, it takes a lot as well, man. Like on a public thing, it's difficult to admit wrongdoings of any level, big or small. I think especially when you have an audience and then that people are looking up to you. But I think that's kind of like what made you guys always stand out, and especially yourself as artists, is that kind of embracing the imperfection, saying like, hey, look, we're human at the end of the day. Shit happens, but then also like how that kind of thing then also defines the art and the music as well, which is what makes it beautiful, because then it speaks to the imperfections of the people listening to it, myself included,
Okay. If that's how you want to look at it, that's fine.
Yeah, but like it's a compliment, of course, and it's just to say that I think it's good when, especially in a world that's so fucking sterile, and everyone is just everything is so manufactured. Like I was walking around Cardiff earlier today. There was like all kinds of traffic and things, and people were walking around because there's a Chris Brown concert, right?
Okay.
And I'm walking around, I couldn't name a song if I tried, but I know who it is, different scene. But I'm walking around looking at people, and there's obviously all these girls and whatever. And I'm just like, I feel like a fucking alien, Like when you look at the modern world and like culturally what everyone's kind of invested in, it's just like, yeah, I have no idea what you're all on about, And when you listen to it, it's like auto-tune shit. And everything is just bland, and now a lot of AI stuff is taking over a lot faster than I think people even realize, and I think there's a real special home and there's a real special place for I think what this music is able to offer people, for like lyrics that aren't afraid of being emotional, aren't afraid of going to the darker bits of our consciousness and our being, because that's just as much us as is anything else,
Yeah, I know, and I get what you're saying, but you've got to remember, you invite half the people at his concert to one of our concerts, they just wouldn't get it. They'd be horrified. They'd just think, "What? This is an alien world. Yeah. Take us back to safety." Because you look at our world, it's all dark and there's quite often inverted crosses all the way. The album covers, obituary and autopsies, album covers. Do you know what I mean? It's a crazy. We love it because we understand it. But for other outsiders looking in, they'll just think, Jesus Christ, who are these people? They're all devil worshippers. They just don't realise we're all lovely, lovely people, enjoying a genre that speaks to us. But you're right, you know, some of those concerts, and I know the sort of concerts you mean, there's just no level of intimacy or emotion. It's just pop music for money. Yeah. No one's investing any emotions in it. It's just money. That's all it's about, you know, because once people get a gold selling, well, not gold anymore, double platinum, they're happy. You know, the manager isn't, because the manager will always be cracking the whip, which is another reason we never got on, because we wanted to do what we wanted to do, not what someone told us to do. Which is why we remained on Peaceville for such a long time, because Hammy, the boss, at no point did he ever say, guys, can you do a 3.5 minute song? That's a bit catchier than all this other stuff. He allowed us complete artistic freedom to do whatever we wanted. You'll never get that from a pop band, because it's not about art, it's about money. And that's all they think about. And that's the big difference between that pop culture and our culture. We do it for the love of it, they do it for cash.
Hey, just a quick moment of your time. For the past 3 years, Iblis Manifestations has been entirely self-funded. This means that every subscription fee, every piece of equipment, all of the travel expenses have come out of my own pocket. Over time, people have asked me how they can support the podcast, and to be honest with you, up until now, the answer's been pretty straightforward, and that is simply spread the word. But now, there's another way. I have set up a Patreon account where followers of the podcast will be able to make monthly donations to the podcast, and this will help cover the costs of streaming gear and basically everything else that goes into making this show. This isn't about making a profit, and to be completely honest, it's not about breaking even either, because that's certainly not been the case for the last 3 years. However, if you do find value in the conversations that we're having on this podcast and wish to help them forward, then you can now support the show. Just head to the link in description and hit the Patreon button. In addition to that, be sure to check out the Iblis Manifestations Big Cartel page, where we will be selling exclusive merchandise for the podcast. At the moment, we got the Extreme Podcast for Extreme People t-shirts, limited to only 30 copies, and the pre-orders will be sent out from the 1st of July, so the link for that is in the description. And in the future, the Big Cartel page will also include some occult accessories and jewelry, which will be handcrafted by myself. And we will also be selling merch and records by other bands, as Iblis will expand into a label of its own. And, of course, it goes without saying, thank you for supporting Iblis Manifestations. It is much appreciated. Yeah. Now, well, there is a big difference, you know, but I also think that difference kind of resonates within the listeners as well, meaning that, you know, you almost get a different experience of life just because of the type of music that you're invested in and you're listening to, you know. And I've said this at like different sort of like live panel discussions and stuff. I've said to people, you know, like at Inferno, I said it to it's a room full of people, full of metalheads. Everyone's got the cool shirts, you know, from Mayhem and Angel Corpse and fucking Rotting Christ and whatever. Like our people, you know? Our kin. That's how I look at metalheads. But then I said to them, look, you all might feel somewhat socially anxious or like antisocial because of the fact that you're surrounded by like thousands of metalheads here. But that's about as many metalheads as you're going to get. Like, there's not that many of us. Yeah. There's not that many of us that are into this music. There's not that many of us who went down to the record store and then started, like, listening to all this stuff, or were tape trading, or were, like, discovering all these bands and getting into all this shit. Or even for myself, you know, like, fucking literally, like, risking jail or getting completely fucked up by the Iranian police back home, you know, playing underground shows and stuff like that, you know. Like, literally, I remember me and my friend going to the park nearby where we lived, playing Mayhem out of like a little Walkman or like a phone or whatever, and windmilling to that. And because it's outside in the open. It's not very loud. Every time you're windmilling, you only just hear the crack as your ear get close, and then when you get to the other side, it's just fucking noise. You don't even hear the drums. But it's like, those of us who've had to like almost like really fight for this music, to be a part of it, to be a participant, to then also play it and go to all of these concerts. It's better to look at it as a privilege and understand that there's not really many of us, and
no, you're right. But it is nice to be among company of a similar mindset, because I went to Fortress Fest in Scarborough, and it's nice to just be around people who are like-minded. I mean, half the time I missed half the bands because I was busy talking to people all the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's great. So and then when you finished your 50th conversation, you get to watch some awesome music. And then you go and have a drink, and you have another 50 conversations with people on the way to the toilet. And it's a great environment. There might not be many of us, but when there's a gathering, it feels great.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And like I said, I see it as a privilege, so I hope that things work out for My Dying Bride down in the future, man, because that's the reason why I brought that up, is because there's not many of us, and there's certainly not many My Dying Brides out there. There's only one in the history of the universe, so I hope you guys can maybe figure things out, and if I can give credit, I think Andrew's a fantastic guitar player, and great songwriter, and I said this to you before when I was talking to you, man. For me, I am absolutely fucking obsessed with the two albums back to back from mid 2000s. From Songs of Darkness, Wars of Light, and Line of Deathless Kings. I know they're kind of slightly overlooked albums, but those two are, for me, are pure fucking genius. I absolutely love those two records. There's not one bad song or a bad moment on any of them.
Wow, I appreciate that. That's high praise indeed. Thanks. Yeah, well, you never know. One day we'll get to play some. One of the weird things when you start picking a set list, you think, right, how long have we got? We're playing a festival. How long have we got? An hour and a half. Okay, great. Right, we've got 14 albums. Where do we start? And then you think, okay, I've got. We'll do this one. It's 12 minutes long. We'll do this one 9 minutes long, and then you realise we've only got 8 songs. And then there's an album that's not even represented. And you think, oh, well, let's just pick one song from every album. But you still can't even do that. You don't have enough time to play them. So at some point, one of the albums or two won't feature in a live capacity. And there's always someone in the audience who screams out for that album as well. We can't do everything. Sorry, if we played if we did a Bruce Springsteen and played for 3 or 4 hours, we could probably have a good go at getting every album represented, but it's not.
I'd pay to see that. Yeah.
Well, I'd do that. Well, you got to remember that I'm not as young as I used to be, but I'm amazed I can still do death metal vocals. To be honest, I thought, when we formed, I think I was 20 when we formed. I can't remember. I thought, get as many of the death metal vocals out of the way quickly, because in 20 years' time, your throat will be fucked. There's no way you'll be death metal in your 40s, certainly not in your 50s. Well, I'm still at it and I'm 57. But if you're playing a long gig, you need to sort of spread that out a little bit. You can't do, well, I certainly couldn't do an hour and a half of death metal singing. I could get an hour and then the voice would completely go, and it would be, so you want clean vocals, death metal vocals, clean vocals, spread it out a bit. So My Dying Bride could do a 3-hour gig, but I'd have to space it out vocally from a vocal performance point of view, rather than, right, this is the first album, we'll do first album, second album. It would have to be, where's all the screaming and shouting? Right, let's spread that out a little bit so I can cope with it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think it's, actually, you know what, you say that. I think that on that last High Parasite album, me and my fiance were listening to it in the car together, and I was like, I think these are like the best harsh vocals I've ever heard from Aaron, because they're just so cohesive, and there's just such a nice texture to the sound. It's almost like a voice is like wine. It's matured over the years.
I appreciate that. I still enjoy doing it because it's a way of venting. A lot of people have frustrations and that they just let them overtake their mind, and they thrash out at people because they've got no way of venting their frustration. Doing death metal vocals just allows you that, to release that valve, and the steam's coming out, and all the pressures that you've had, recently, it all comes out by screaming and shouting. And I'm lucky enough to be able to still do it after all this time. We've written most of the second High Parasite album, and I've got one eye on playing live, and I'm trying to make sure. I said to Toombs, let's make this next one clean vocals, because I love screaming and shouting, but as I say, I can't do an entire gig with it. It would ache too much. It doesn't hurt, but it just starts to disappear. And although you're giving it the full Monty, it's no longer coming out as loud and as gravelly as you want it to do. So you've got to pace yourself a bit.
You know what? I actually totally relate to that. In fact, hearing you say that as a vocalist makes me feel a lot less insecure about some of my own thing. Because before I would just go on and just like push as hard as possible, because with especially with our stuff, we're kind of more Black and Death, with like even bits of thrash in there, but overall it's extremely aggressive. I have a very aggressive thing on stage, but playing guitar and doing vocals at the same time, I just like, my thing is there to, I look at myself as like the toothpaste, like how when you get to the end of the toothpaste, that last bit lasts you for a fucking month. That's right. That's how I feel like on stage. I'm just like squeezing like the last bit of like juice and life out there. And vocally, that's not actually a very smart thing to do, as I've kind of come to realize. Yeah. So it's actually refreshing to hear you kind of say that you got to kind of pace it out a little bit in between songs. I think that's a very smart thing to do, especially if you're doing a run of shows. Yeah,
I did it with My Dying Bride. You look at the songs and you look at where the vocals are happening and say, right, well, let's do some. But always start with some clean vocals, just to get warmed up. Because I'm not one of those people who warms up in the dressing room, annoying everybody by warbling away. So I use the first song to warm up my vocal cords, and then as the gig progresses, the more guttural voice comes out. It's a similar thing with High Parasite. What I think's really good about this year, we've got no headlining shows. They're all support slots or festivals. So it's about 45 minutes, maybe 50, I guess an hour at some places. But that means I can go full 100% attack mode from the first song. If we had to play for an hour and a half, I'd have to pace myself. But for an hour, we can give it the full beans, which is great. I don't like headlining shows. Even with My Dying Bride, I didn't like headlining. I like to get the gig out of the way and then enjoy whatever bands are coming on afterwards and chill out. And it's a similar thing with High Parasite. When we finish, we get to watch loads of bands for free, and it's brilliant.
Actually, I totally understand where you're coming from with that, because when you're headlining, it's not just the fact that as soon as you're off stage, everyone's packing and then everyone's tired and ready to go home. And there's that kind of really cold, emotionless aftermath of a show where everyone's just wants to pack and fuck off and go home, basically, You've got that. But also the worst part is that horrendous anticipation leading up to it, especially as you were kind of saying earlier. If those songs were really that as difficult as they were for you, as you said, then it must have been tough waiting all day knowing what you're about to go through.
It is. It's awful. You get those sort of butterflies in your stomach. And it reminded me the similar sensation when I was younger, and you saw an attractive, or you're aware of an attractive woman, and you were trying to summon up that courage to maybe speak to her. Those like nervous anticipation. Well, it's worse than that before gigs. It's turmoil. It's turmoil and it's awful. So when you realise, okay, we're not until midnight. I've got all day thinking about it, and there's some prestige, obviously, with headlining gigs, and that's great. That will never go away. But there is that massive come down. By the time when you end the show and you go into the dressing room and you sort of cool down a little bit and have a beer, and there's no going back into the venue to meet your fans because they've all fucked off, and there's only the cleaners. There's only the cleaners in there now. So it's quite nice to go on about 9 o'clock or something, and then you've got a couple of hours to chill out with everybody and say hello, sign some shit, and get some photos done. It's great.
Absolutely. That's exactly that. You know, when I said emotionless cold, that's exactly what I was referring to. The cleaners and all the security people that are just forcibly like kicking everyone out. Yeah. They also want to go home, and then they've had enough of hearing fucking noise all day. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's crazy, man. Yeah. It
is a bit of a come down, and particularly those who've got jobs on Monday as well. You know, you've been signing autographs and you've been on stage singing and dancing and screaming and shouting, and it's all while you're drinking, you're spilling beer and meeting loads of new people, and then you're back at work Monday morning, and it's like, what a fucking come down.
Oh man, yeah, it is. It really is. Yeah, it's a humbling force, but like. I think it's kind of necessary as well, though, to kind of readjust you to kind of normal life as well. As much as it's like one of my most disliked feelings is going back to normal life after you've just been gigging and living the life, you know?
It can be hard work. You know, you walk past the neighbours and, hi, Aaron, have you been anywhere this weekend? Fuck off. Fuck off, Granny.
Yeah.
You know, you'd be polite and you say, oh yeah, we did a gig in Holland and it was great. Oh, was there many people there? When you say, yeah, probably about 10,000, they're like blown away because the only things they've seen are, you know, the local act in the working men's club, and there's 40 people. When you tell them there's 1,000, they're like, oh my God, that's incredible. Thankfully, no one's ever asked to listen to my music because I think they realise he's a heavy metalist. You won't like
heavy
it.
Metalist.
Yeah, he's a heavy metalist, Judith. You won't like it.
Oh man, that's by the way one of those things. Like unless you've lived in Britain long enough, or if you're from here, you know, maybe some of those mannerisms you wouldn't quite understand. But I do. I mean, I lived in Yorkshire 7 years, especially, so I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, it is a thing. I think it's particularly worse if you've been doing a tour, because then you're kind of like completely detached from reality. Time just kind of like stops back home, and then wherever you were, you just go back home and then pick back up exactly where you started, even though you feel like a different person. You almost feel like you should be treated differently just because of what you went through, you know?
Yeah, and it was... Yeah, I remember I used to work... In fact, when I helped form My Dying Bride back in the day, you know, at that time I was working 12-hour shifts in a plastic factory.
Wow.
I would finish work at 7 o'clock in the evening. I'd drive my father home because we both worked at the same place. Cook, eat, then drive to Bradford, rehearse for a couple of hours, then drive home, bed, up at 6 a.m., another 12 hours in the factory. You know, it was hard work, but I was dedicated to it. And I put the hours and put the effort in, and it paid off.
It did. And perhaps, you know what, when you mention something like that, first of all, I commend that. I love hearing those kind of stories, man. You know, it only increases my sense of respect for the band and the artist. But, you know, because I feel like I'm kind of built a similar way, you know, where it's just kind of like constantly working, and not necessarily with expectation, but just in building towards a vision and a future, something that you believe in, right? Yeah, and especially in an artistic context, you know, people don't realize how many sacrifices that come with being in a band, period, okay?
Oh, yeah.
And that's not just the sacrifice of being on the road and being away, but also the mental sacrifice of it, the roller coasters that you have to go through emotionally, you know, and then trying to just be normal and functional at home, you know.
I know, and relationships as well. You know, literally everyone I've known has broken up from a partner. Because the band's away, and sometimes the partner thinks, oh God, you're going to be talking to women every night, and it's just the fact that you're just not there anymore. You know, you're going away on a 3-week tour, and longer for many bands. You know, and for some people, they're just not prepared to wait. It's not fair for them. Why should they wait? You've chosen to live a rock and roll lifestyle. and you expect, the person you met before you were a rock and roll superstar to still be there when you get back. And sometimes they just think, it's not for me. And I know, again, I know people who have left the music business to be with their partner because they realize, do you know what? All that airport bullshittery every weekend, I'd rather be at home eating popcorn and watching a movie on the sofa with the one I love. And it's just not, I've seen people come and go in My Dying Bride. They come along for the ride a little bit. They realise it's just not my cup of tea, and off they go again. It happens all the time. We see it all throughout the whole metal business, all music business. People, they have a go thinking it's going to be amazing because it looks very glamorous from the outside. But, the nitty gritty of standing with your passport in a queue of 10,000 holiday makers, and you just think, God almighty, and we're doing it next week, and the week after, and the week after. I mean, this weekend we're going to Lithuania. And it's going to be exciting, but I do know for a fact that on the way home, we've got a 7-hour wait over in Amsterdam airport. What am I going to do for 7 hours? That's 7 hours of my life. I'm not getting that back. So, with me talking about being busy as much as I am now, I'm trying to cram as much into my life as I possibly can because I'm feeling creative. I feel like I've got a lot to give and I'm enjoying it. But when there's waiting around, like last weekend, we were in the van, 15 hours it took to get to the destination. Now, I'm not just going to sit there. So I'm reading and I'm trying to write some lyrics and I'm trying to write some poetry. It's hard, isn't it? Because you're in a van and there's people snoring and there's the radio on and shit like that. There's distractions galore. But I am not hanging around for hours and hours and hours doing nothing. Those days are behind me. Even on an airplane. I don't know how long it takes to fly to Lithuania. But I will be doing something creative on that aeroplane. I will not just be sitting there hoping it doesn't crash.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You gotta keep on going, man. Because the thing is as well, it takes its toll on you if you don't. Like it's almost like I look at it almost like surfing. You need to like surf the waves. Okay, if you just let go, the water will like take you, and then you'll end up feeling extremely tired and exhausted by the time you get there, and yeah, it's those are the kind of things that people don't think about. And the fact of the matter is, even if you make it really big, there's still the level of luxury doesn't increase that much when it comes to doing music. Okay, like you're still gonna be stuck at airports. You're still gonna be flying every weekend, wondering if the plane's gonna crash. Okay, even though like flying is the safest method of transport that we know, allegedly. Even though I always find that really hard to believe. The statistics show that flying is the safest way to travel. But every time I'm on there, I'm like, fucking hell, this is gonna be the one.
That's where gin and tonic helps.
Well, I decided to make it extra difficult for myself, so I quit drinking 3 years ago. And
well, that's I know people who've given up drinking, and I admire them. I mean, for some people it's medical, for others it's a mental thing, and for others, they just want more clarity in their life. I like a drink in a pub, like social drinking. I don't mind drinking at home. Some people say, "Oh, I never drink at home. Why would you do that?" Because I fucking love it. And then, but I only really drink beer and wine. The only time the sort of top shelf stuff comes into action, and again, it's only gin and tonic, is at an airport. Or on an airplane. That's the only time. Like where there was one great moment when we flew to do 70,000 tons in Miami.
Oh yeah,
we were at the back of the airplane, the whole band and crew, and. So they come around with a trolley and say, "I'll have a gin and tonic, please. Make it a double gin and tonic with ice." So she's fannying around and she gets me, and then I can't remember who it was, the other band member. "Oh yeah, I'll have a gin and tonic, double gin and tonic with." And she says, "Are you all going to do this?" And we were like, "That probably." So she just said, "Well, I'll tell you what. There was a spare seat in the middle. I'll give you all the gins, a case of like 50 gins." All the tonics, a bucket of ice, and a load of plastic cups. Can you serve your band? And I was like, yes, of course I can.
Right.
I became, I'm pouring all the gin and tonics for the band, and we were mightily drunk. But that's a 9-hour flight, and every time you fly across the Atlantic, there's turbulence, which is horrible. But when you're not drunk, but when you're a little bit merry, it doesn't matter.
Mate, like airplane drunk is next level. I remember going to Dubai one time, and then I was going there from UK. I was flying from Birmingham, and I remember, and I'm kind of like, obviously coming from Iran, kind of like feel not so positively about the main religion over there, and over there you're not supposed to drink either.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why when I was 15 we used to mix apple juice with ethanol, because that was an easier way of getting it. So
okay, wow.
So a little bit of background there for you, and I remember I was sat next to this, I don't know what you would call him, I guess he was like a UAE person, clearly a Muslim person, okay? And me being me, and obviously I was a bit younger at the time, just out of spite, I kept like ordering alcohol, and because I was like, yeah, this person doesn't drink it, so I'm just going to be what I'm like, I'm going to drink, It's kind of like, wearing a Mayhem shirt to a church kind of thing, that's how I was looking at it.
Yeah.
So I remember, and all I had was like literally like 2 glasses of red wine, like full glasses, granted, but yeah, man, that fucking pressure, and I was like, fine. I was like having a jolly of a time to myself, and knowing that this guy next to me is probably judging me, and I'm like, yeah, good, like judge away, you can't do this. So just very childish and spiteful, obviously. But then I remember I stood up to go to the bathroom. As soon as I stood up, I realized the damage, and I just fell back into my seat. And I could feel like the guy next to me, the Muslim guy, almost like tutting and like shaking his head like, oh, this drunk asshole.
Yeah,
just judging away. But yeah, no, the reason why I quit wasn't because because I have a problem with it or I have a problem with anyone else who's drinking it. Luckily, it never became that way for me. For me, as you put it perfectly, out of the things that you mentioned, it was just for more clarity, I think, kind of realizing that life is short. So if I say or do something, I just want to be able to take full responsibility for it, and I want to be present. That's the hardest thing of being a musician, is just being present in normal life and not constantly thinking about what's the next lyric, what's the next thing, like the missus says, hey, can you take the bins out, and I'm still like miles away, like, oh yeah, if we play this show here and then if we do this, it's gonna be cool, and she's like screaming and shouting. Still, just learning to be present, that's kind of what it is for me. Otherwise all my friends do drinking and all sorts of other things. I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah, I know a couple of people who don't drink, and when we drink with them, I know that obviously the more alcohol you intake, the more gibberish you talk, but you don't realise you're talking absolute nonsense, and you're talking at a higher volume. With each drink, your volume gets louder and louder as well.
Yeah,
and then after a while. Because I Fortress Fest the year before I was there, but I was only there for the day, and I was driving at midnight. I was going to drive back home after, so I wasn't drinking. And there was a bunch of people there that I did know who'd clearly been at it all day long, and it's funny to watch.
Yeah.
But the nonsense that spills from their mouths is hilarious. It's all goodwill, and I just know that there are points where I'm spilling absolute gibberish out as well, but I don't care.
Yeah, that's it. No, listen, man, I'm all for having fun. This is the thing. Like people kind of perhaps maybe misunderstand about me sometimes as well. Like I'll happily stay up till 4 or 5 in the morning with you if we're having a good chat. If we're having a good fucking time, if the company's good, I'll stay up. I'll go the mile, no problem, okay? I just don't need a substance in my system, because if anything, I think it slows me down. I'm more kind of switched on and intense without anything in me, so that's just me in general. But yeah, man, you got to have that, and that sort of company just is what really makes the difference at the end of the day, Because I remember when I first moved to the UK, I knew no one, right? So I didn't have any friends. I was just some Iranian kid with a BC Rich guitar on my back, you know, and then I just showed up with fucking zero contacts, you know, probably not a smart idea. Very young as well. I was only like, you know, essentially a young adult, you know. And I came just for the sole reason of continuing playing this music and for actually being able to play live shows and then, you know, embracing the lifestyle. That was my story. And I remember, you know, like spending time with people and finally being able to legally get shit-faced, even though I was already getting shit-faced in Iran. But then like kind of feeling like, oh, I'm not having as much fun as I thought I would, even though it's free. Yeah. And that's kind of when I realized that it's actually down to the company of the people that you're with, you know, like, do you enjoy the person that you're with, you know, and that's a big part of it, you know. That's why when you go out on a Saturday night, there's a lot of people shit-faced. Most of those people are probably not having a good time. They just don't have a good company, you know?
No, that's true. You're right. You're absolutely right. There's a lot that goes on. I mean, you can see it even in the local pub. I mean, it's Thursday night and it's quiz night in the local pub. You know, I'm sacrificing the quiz, which I'll let you know, I won last week.
Oh, wow.
So I'm sacrificing that. And, you know, you go there.
I do appreciate it. I feel honored.
There's a couple of guys who, you know, they're in there every night. They're not together.
Right.
And they don't say a word all night. And they just sit there drinking and then they go home. And it looks like such a lonely, lonely thing. Mm. And for me, I think I drink because it kind of just gives me a little fuzzy buzz. And I quite like a fuzzy buzz. But I don't think I've ever been to a pub on my own and sat on my own and drank on my own and then left on my own. I don't think I wouldn't do that. I don't really understand what that is. That's loneliness, I think.
It is loneliness, and I can tell you that because the first couple of years I was in the UK, I actually did that. But that was only because I literally didn't have friends.
Well, I mean, it's a good place to meet people, isn't it? That's why it's a public house. You go there because other people are there. You know, your only chance of meeting someone is going to be there because you're not gonna find someone who's going to go on a date with you in the supermarket. The pub is the only place where you there's a chance of bumping into a like-minded person, particularly in a rock environment, because you've all got a heavy metal t-shirt on, so you can eyeball people and realize what they're into, and that's almost like that's broken the ice. And then when you see someone who's got a similar shirt on for a band that you really like, you immediately, or if you have enough confidence, can go and say, nice t-shirt, and then talk about that music, and that opens up a door which wouldn't normally be there for some people. So the pub it does serve its purpose.
Oh yeah, no, for sure it does. You know, I've worked at pubs before, you know, so I'm like totally familiar with the environment, you know, and you meet some very interesting people as well, you know. Like I remember this guy who would always bring in his dog and then just say dad jokes and then leave, you know, like that's all he did, you know. He came up to me one day, like out, not even like a hello or anything. This is up in Sheffield, by the way, you know, so not too far from yourself. And this is up in Grenoside. It's a little village north of Sheffield. And he just comes up to me out of nowhere. I'm there behind bar, you know, probably like eating, you know, like having a fistful of peanuts from the cup, you know, because the manager's not watching, you know. He just comes up to me and he goes like, hey, what do you call a girl stood in between two goalposts?
Go on.
A net.
Okay.
It's like, okay, and then he just left.
Wow.
It's like, fucking, what is this? But yeah, you get those kind of types of people as well, you know. But yeah, you know,
I could never work with the public. I could never do a job like that, or work in catering or anything where I have to deal with the public in a service area. It's just. I've seen it, you know. I've been to cafes and restaurants and bars and all the rest of it, and you know, I'll have a cup of tea and a sandwich, and then people go on endlessly. I want rye bread. I want vegan margarine. I don't want Kos lettuce. I want iceberg lettuce.
Oh God!
And it's just like, do you know what? Fuck off. You know, I mean, you know, time for this. Go and eat somewhere else, you twat. I can't be bothered. But you know, it's absolutely fine to ask for something you want, but I think there's a line that some people just love to step over, and they'll moan about, the size of the cup. It's not a very big cup. Can I have a bigger cup? They're the fucking standard cups, you twat. Oh, this knife's too big. Well, fuck off then. You know, people just like to complain. They don't feel like they've had a conversation unless they've had they're complaining about something. I just don't understand that attitude. So I could never work with the public.
Oh, mate, I've dealt with so many of that.
Yeah, I bet.
So many of that. Different jobs, you know. I was also head of reception at a casino for a few years there. And I've seen a lot, you know. But I think it kind of like teaches you something as well, you know. It gives you thick skin, you know. Like I look at everything as a, you know, like maybe almost to a toxic point, you know. Like I look at everything as kind of like an opportunity to learn a skill. So at the end of the day, everything is a skill. The ability to have a conversation, that's a skill. The ability to maintain a relationship, to run a business, to create a song. Okay, these are things that some of them are obviously very authentic to ours, to who we are. But ultimately, it's also a skill of being able to manifest that thing and then sort of interact with the world. So, you know, I've had plenty of really shitty experiences with people, but I always look at it as like, well, that's a lesson. I am now more skilled at doing this, you know.
Okay, so, well, I take your word for it.
There we go, man. But yeah, by the way, totally off topic here, you know, a bit of maybe more personal question for yourself, okay? You know, and hope that's okay if I'm asking this. I understand that because I listened to your podcast with Jackie the first time around that you did that, you know, which was amazing, a very emotional episode. You know, I remember like getting emotional just listening to it. How are things for you now at home? And obviously, I know that you know, like how's your personal life been on that front? You know, because obviously as a father, you got to experience a pretty tough time for a while there.
Well,
so how are you keeping up?
Yeah, really good actually.
Amazing.
We're doing, you know, my daughter's doing so much better, improvements all the time, because obviously, you know, there was a lot of hospital visits and they're down to yearly now. So, you know, that's great. And I actually think, I believe when she turns 15 in a couple of years' time, I think the age of 15 is when that'll be the last visit to hospital she needs. There'll be no more follow-up after that. And I mean, when you consider, you know, she had cancer when she was 5. So the team at the hospital will support you, you know, for 10 years. You think that's incredible. And thank you. Thank you for that. Didn't cost us a penny. If we lived in America, we'd be skint. We'd have had to mortgage the house and everything. We'd have to sell everything. Here, you know, we've had years of treatment free of charge, which is incredible. And the support from, you know, Candlelighters, which is a great charity. You know, I try and sell some bits and bobs on eBay and stuff and give them a little bit of that. And I was gonna say to Toombs, when we play the Leeds gig with Unto Others, would it be okay if any merch profit I can give to Candlelighters, because they're based in Leeds. So if we do a Leeds gig,
okay,
and then realised if we don't take that money and put fuel in the van, we can't drive the van. It's like, fucking it. All right. Well, maybe in a couple of years' time, when we become a slightly bigger band, we'll be able to generate some form of profit, and I can give it to Candlelighters. But yeah, they helped us through, you know, what was obviously a nightmarish time. Anyone who's had kids who has to deal with childhood cancer, it is all the worst things you imagine it to be. It's terror beyond belief. And you know, you sometimes, if you are lucky enough to sleep, you wake up in the morning and you think, was that a shit dream? And then it punches you in the face and you realize it wasn't a dream, it's still going on. So yeah, it sucked and it sucked and it sucked for ages. But now, you know, she's Thursdays as well, she stays at school for an extra hour or two, because she's now in some sort of dance class where they do, I said, what sort of dance is it? And she said, interpretive. which doesn't mean anything. I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? And her school came second in a humongous North of England dance competition, which has meant they've now been entered into a dance competition down in London, where she's going in 2 weeks' time. So she's fit as a fiddle. So from being, what she was like to now being a dancer, she's incredible. She's doing really, really well. There may be some issues further down the line, because when she had radiotherapy, it's quite low in the abdomen. So we don't know what's going to happen in the future when it comes to, children.
Mm-hmm.
Cross that bridge when we come to it. You can buy kids these days. It's fine. But for the most part, she's brilliant. Thank you.
That's amazing to hear, man. Very happy to hear that.
Yeah,
because parenthood is difficult as it is, and then to have something like that, I actually can't pretend to know what that must have been like for you, man.
I wouldn't. When we watch in England, I think we have what is it, Red Nose Day, and it's a charity fun, it's comedy and it's raising money for charity. And you see all the little videos that, the sad bits normally when you get up and go to the toilet or you put the kettle on. And you always think, thank God it's them and not me. And I was thinking, when it happened to us, I was thinking, why is it? This only happens to people on telly. Why is it happening to me? I didn't, it was baffling. I just couldn't figure out why have you picked me? And it sucked. And every single day, and this is one of the reasons you can't sleep properly. It's like, because you're constantly questioning, why? Can you imagine trying to work out an immense mathematical conundrum? And you're like, you can see all the work, all the numbers and all the rest, and you think, oh gosh, and it sticks in, and you're constantly trying to work out what's the solution? How do I get to the end? And it's like that, but it never leaves. Your brain is never shutting up. What can we do? What medication are we on tomorrow? Who makes that medication? What's the history of it? And it's just why us? And it's exhausting, absolutely exhausting. And as I say, that's why candlelighters come along and they put a hand on your shoulder and say, we'll help you out, mate. And they did.
That's beautiful to hear, man. Very good. And you know what? It may not even be directly related, but it's actually really good for me to hear what you're saying there, because not to take away from what you're saying, but actually to perhaps even add to it, because that thought of like, why me or why us kind of thing. Because I've had very similar thoughts for the last week, with the war going on, like my home country. It's not just my home country. My parents are still living there.
Yeah.
They're in areas where there's like rocket landing in surrounding areas, Luckily, touch wood, they're fine. They're still fine at the moment. We're keeping in touch, but I've had those same kind of questions, and it's the infinite unknown, you don't know what's happening. But I think the important thing is to just try and stay positive, and control what you can control, and just switch the lights on, keep them on, and beam at the rest of it.
Yeah, exactly. Because some people say, I don't know how you coped. Well, I had no option. There weren't options. There was no exit strategy. These are the cards we were dealt. Deal with it. And there's no running away. You've just got to knuckle down and get on with it. And there's no easy way out. It's hard. It's a hard slog until it's over. And I wish, your parents and everyone else in Iran, great peace. I know it's difficult, and some people are going to lose their lives. It's a dreadful situation. It really is. And I'm glad I live where I live. But people are born and raised in Iran, because you can argue, well, why don't you fly your mum and dad over? They shouldn't have to leave their own country. You know what I mean? And so there's an argument for, well, that's where they were born, that's where they live, that they don't want to leave, even if there's conflict.
It's a good point.
So it's a difficult situation. I mean, that part of the world has been messy for a long, long time, and clearly no one knows the solution because they're still at it now. Maybe there isn't a solution, so it'll just carry on forever, which would be a great shame.
I think so too, man. Yeah, there is. I mean, the thing is, there's so many different nuances within it. I think that pro this or pro that never helped anyone. And unfortunately, people like to sometimes put words in my mouth. But I think that ultimately at the end of it, I'm for innocent human lives not being lost and instead preserved. I'm a humanitarian person. If that's not black metal, I don't care, no problem. I'm a human and I'm a humanitarian person. I like to see people do well. I like to see people be good and be healthy, and I don't want to see bad things happen to good people. I think that's fairly straightforward.
Amen to that.
Hell yeah. There we go. Aaron, my man, thank you so much for your time tonight.
It's been an absolute pleasure, mate. Thank you. Well, I'm just seeing if I can. What time is it? Can I go down to the quiz? Quiz has begun now without me. They give you free food as well, not like crisps.
Do they?
But last time, there's no point eating at home on a Thursday because when you go there, the quiz is free of charge. Hot food. Last time we had Mexican chicken fajitas.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's not baked beans on toast. It's proper cooked food, and it's bloody brilliant. So maybe I could just rock up for the food at half time.
Do it, man. Do it. Listen, I appreciate your time and you being here. And that sounds amazing, by the way. I might have to come up to Halifax at some point and actually try out this pub and the quiz.
You are welcome, mate, anytime.
Absolutely, man.
It's been a pleasure. Really, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for spending time with me.
Oh, the pleasure is absolutely mine. Best of luck to yourself with High Parasite. Very excited for everything you've got coming up. Hope you have a killer show in Lithuania this weekend. I think it's Kilkim Zaibu, by the way. I think that's the name of the festival.
Very well done. Yes, very well done.
There we go. Thank you, sir. And yeah, I hope that we'll see better things from the My Dying Bride camp in the future as well. Yeah, we'll see about that. And yeah, man, all the best of luck to you. And to everyone else who's been listening to the episode so far, hope you guys enjoyed this one. Support the fuck out of Mr. Aaron Stainthorpe, and we'll see you on the next episode of Iblis Manifestations. Take care.
Cheers.